Carlos, I'm so happy to have you here with us today. First and foremost, congratulations. Which an exciting nomination. There's a lot going on. So I
Thank
want to
you.
be one of the first ones to say bravo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. Like I said before, I'm a huge fan of your podcast, so I'm excited to be part of this.
Well, I'm just thrilled. I can't, I mean, I guess I'm not the only one. Shogun has been my favorite show of the year so far. And when we connected, we discussed a few things, and I saw there was a chance to have you here on board with us. And I was very thrilled. And here we are.
Thank you. Here we are. Yes.
Where are you right now? You're not in US, right?
So right now I'm in the south of France in a small town called Perpignan, and I was born here. So I'm here right now visiting my parents.
Oh, how nice. Were you there when you heard the big news?
Yes, I was here, and I actually invited my entire family. I had my two nieces on each side. And then, yeah, it was very exciting, very, very exciting. So this was my first nomination, and I really couldn't think of a better project than Shogun to be nominated for. So this is thrilling, and actually, I mean, I'm happy for myself, but I'm also happy for my family, because I think, my parents have done a lot of sacrifices for me to move to America and pursue this career. And then I'm obviously very happy for my team in Vancouver and all the people that have helped us around the world to make this beautiful costume.
What it was like to have your parents with you? I mean, I'm sure you had a sense that you have had a good chance to be nominated. I mean, the show has get so many praises
Mhm.
all year long, but it's different when you see your name up there.
Yeah, it is different. It is different because I think that it's not just about winning for this show. You start to go backwards and think about everything that led you to being nominated, not only all the hard work that you put into this project, but also all the projects that you've done before that led you to this. And so it was a lot of decisions that needed to be made to get to this point. So I thought about the journey that got me here and how grateful I have been to be part of this incredible adventure.
Yeah, what journey indeed. And were you surprised? I mean, you knew the show would be have several nominations. Were you surprised 25, if I'm not mistaken? I mean, that's incredible. Was that like, I mean, I'm sure everybody was thrilled, but were you surprised with the number? I'm like, that many?
I think that if you would have asked me that question when we were shooting Shogun, I would have just looked at you with a big face of, surprise, because it didn't even cross my mind that this show was award worthy, and not because it didn't deserve all the awards, but because I think everybody was so focused on doing the best job they can do and working hard and surviving. It was a really long shoot. It was a lot of hard work. It was very specific too. We needed a lot of research, and we made thousands of costumes. We had a tight, schedule to make things happen. So at that moment, I really didn't think much about awards. But I remember on episode 6, I was in my office, and my costume supervisor came to me and showed me a picture that they sent her from set of Kiku and Gin as they come out of the tea house. And one is wearing her beautiful red uchikake, and the other one her green outfit. And I remember my supervisor looking at me and said to me, "Carlos, you're going to be nominated for an Emmy." And I just looked at her and I was like, wait, what? It didn't even cross my mind. And it's at that moment where I realized that we're doing something very special. And that's where the energy shifted for me. And that's about the episode where I also felt that there was a really great connection started to happen between the Japanese community and the rest of the crew, and we found the middle line where we could work together. So it's at that moment where I realized that we were going to start creating something very special. Now, of course, you ask me now, after the Emmy nominations came out, I'm not surprised because every head of department was on top of their games. I mean, they are the best at what they do. Everybody has done an incredible job, and everybody deserves to be nominated because I know how hard they worked. And I think it's one of those shows where it was a team effort. Everybody needed to be at the top of their games. Everybody needed to be at the same level. And so I was very lucky to work with extremely talented artists, and each one of us contributed to the success of the others.
And I was about to ask the same question regarding at what point did you realize you had something special in your hands, but you already kind of gave me that fantastic story and moment in place. And that's the kind of thing that you will treasure forever. You remember that day so clearly in your mind. And to like when, as you mentioned, there was a shift. You knew that, okay, we have something going on over here. Because as I think what you said is such an interesting thing. A lot of times people start already expecting the result, but you were so immersed on the process, on getting the work done, what it needed to be done, that there was no time to think about going to be after this. What's next? What could happen? What will happen?
Yeah, and I think in a way that's really healthy, because you don't work for recognition, you don't work for awards. You really, I think being in this industry is a lifestyle. You need to embrace it, and everybody that was working on Vancouver was truly an artist. And so I think that it was really about the love and the passion that we put into everything that we created. There wasn't even nobody really thought at that moment about awards or recognition. It's a different type of energy that moves you to get that kind of respect. For us, we were enjoying what we were doing. We were surviving too. We were invested. We were passionate about what we were doing. And the idea of awards never really crossed our.
How did you get attached to the project?
So, well, I received, that was when I was contacted for the first time for this project, was right after the pandemic ended, and it was early 2021. And I was contacted by a producer that I've worked with 30 years ago. He was the producer on a movie in which I was the assistant designer, not the costume designer. It was Three Kings with George Clooney, Mark Wahlberg, and
Yes, it's a great movie.
I think it was in '97 or something like that. And so he was the producer on that show, and we stayed in touch because he speaks French, and so never able to work together, for 25, 30 years. But he always tried to, get me on one of his jobs. And then it was never the right fit. It never worked until this one. So he sent me literally 2 lines, to know if I was interested in interviewing for Shogun. And so he told me that it was happening in 1600, feudal Japan, 10 episodes, TV show for FX. Do you want to read the script? And so I remember that at that moment, I was completely focused on the fact that it was TV. And so the TV format is not really my favorite thing in the world because it's really long. It's a different way of working than a movie. I prefer the movies. It's shorter. You go, you do your job, and you move on to something else. TV, specifically this one, was almost 2 years of my life. So it's not really something that I was too excited about it. But then I went to the kitchen, and I was again in Perpignan with my parents. And I told my parents about this possibility of Shogun. And I don't think I've ever seen my parents being as excited as when I told them about Shogun. And so I was like, wait, what's happening? And so they reminded me really about the TV show that came out in the 80s. And so, of course, both of them were really fans of that TV show. And so I decided to look into it. And so when I started watching briefly some images of the TV show from the 80s, it reminded me of when I was a kid and how much really those images, those visuals impacted me. So I decided to look into it. So I asked for the script and I read the script. And so that's how the process started and how I got my interviews with that producer and with our showrunner, Justin Mark.
And that's an interesting thing too. So can you tell me a little bit about those early conversations with Justin, and I'm sure eventually with Rachel as well, who was the writer from the show?
Yes. So I think, well, the thing that came out the most when I spoke with Justin Marks was definitely about how important it was for him to be as authentic as possible. So it was really all about research. And I knew that every designer in the world would fight for this project. In my head, I was convinced nobody would hire me because there was nothing in my resume that
Hmm.
was close enough to make somebody um, make the decision of hiring me, right? So, but it was after the pandemic and I was so bored and I needed to put my energy into something. So I started doing a lot of research of that period before getting into the character. And I started doing boards and boards, and I did about 125 boards of
Wow.
different aspects of that period without thinking about the characters. It was mostly about makeup and hair and shoes and fabrics and textiles and the dyes, natural dyes, and you know the different silhouettes for men and women. And so I started putting everything into boards. I edited everything to 30 boards, and those are the ones that I presented to Justin Marks and Ed McDonald, the lead producer of Shogun. And so that's when we started speaking about this period and how important it was for Justin to make sure that we needed to know everything about this period, in order to be respectful towards the Japanese culture, the Japanese aesthetic, but also to be able to understand our characters. And so that was really the main focus on those. So I had two interviews with him and Ed McDonald, and then the third one was only with Justin Marks, in which he offered me the project. And so we started speaking about what was the intention behind the costumes and the characters, and how to move forward, what was the goal, and things like that.
See, and then we're going back to the point that we talked earlier. You weren't even worried about the consequences of the interview. You were just doing the work. You were just doing the
Yes.
research. You were just
Yes.
immersing yourself in the process and let the outcome reveal itself. And when you're doing those researches, did you have like a to-go place to find all the information that you needed, like a major historic book or someone they were able to find information regarding, because I think what we have an idea of feudal Japan is very much about the samurais and the katanas, that kind of idea. But you went deep in terms of how the ladies of the house used to interact, how the tea ceremony was a big part of the culture as well. Where were you going to find those information while you were developing your storyboard?
So for the interviews at that moment, because they only sent me the first script, I
Mhm.
only did research online. So what I did is that I went to the archives of every museum in the world that had any kind of pieces from the Sengoku period. And so I did as much research as I could online about this period, before, after, because I think that it's always interesting to understand what happened after and before this period. So the costumes have a little bit more meaning in a way. You can
Mhm.
place them in history in a way, and you know where they're coming from and where they're going. So I also did a lot of research about paintings of that period, because obviously there were no pictures, any photographs. So that was the only way that the only things that I could access that would really give me a good sense of this period. I also watched certain movies like Silence, the Scorsese movie, because it was also in that period. And I know that the producers really liked the look of all the peasants. So I wanted
Mhm.
to look into that. I didn't watch any kind of samurai, Japanese movies, because I didn't want to be influenced by the vision, those Japanese directors and those Japanese costume designers. I knew that what we were doing wasn't only a product for Japan, but it was for the entire world. So I needed to start this project from a different perspective without that influence, right? So that's the research that I did when I met with them for the beginning. Then when I went to Vancouver and I started the project, I mean, I bought a lot of books, obviously. I had experts in Japanese textiles in my department. Again, we did a lot of research in museums all around the world. We also had a team in Japan that sent us rental pieces from that period, so we could actually see the construction. And so those were, most importantly, I think that I was going to forget about this, but we were in touch with an expert, Frederick Kranz, who was my main expert. We were in touch with a lot of consultants throughout the project, but the main one was Frederick Kranz, who's one of a university teacher at the University of Tokyo. Of Kyoto, sorry, of Kyoto. And he was my person to go to. So he's the one really that led me to understand this period the meaning of the language of the clothing of that period, and understanding the details about the armors and the meaning behind everything, and how everything was made, and also understand all these characters because they were based also on real characters too. So that was my main research.
I think I saw somewhere that you created like over 2,300 customs. Is
Yeah.
that real?
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about that because that itself is just the number is just mind-boggling. Is how long of a was how long time did you had it to come up with this? Your team, the process? Because as you mentioned, the storyboards, the creation, the visualization, it's one thing. Then you have to execute it. You have to produce those.
So we didn't have a long prep because I started on May 1st of 2021, and we started shooting in September, sort of the end of September. I think it was September 22nd, 2021. So it really wasn't that long. And also most of my crew was busy on another project. So for the first 3 months, I only had 10 people with me. And then everybody started in July, August. And that's when, the machine was in full mode making costumes. We also had, crews around the world, that were in charge of, the manufacturing of all the armor too, and the background, the clothing for all the peasants too. So it was made in China, in Thailand. We had a team in Japan that was sending us a lot of the fabrics. So it was a lot of coordination that happened at that moment. It was definitely stressful because 5 months is not long enough to make that many costumes. But the good thing about TV is that you need to focus on the first and the second episode. And then as you go, it gives you a little bit more time to start designing episode 3 and 4 and 5. And then you start building up sort of like a wardrobe, a closet for each one of the characters. You already have the armors. So even though every episode was tricky and complicated because it's always all the characters always go to different locations, different towns, are facing different circumstances, and they always need new costumes. The fact that we already had most of the armors gave us a little bit more time to design the rest of the costumes, right? But I think for me, the main challenge in the beginning was when I started, I've never done anything related to Japanese clothing. I didn't know anything about, Japanese culture, on its own. And so I started only with one of my assistants at that moment, Kenichi Tanaka, and he's the one that helped me to design all the armor. And so in order to have enough time to make the manufacturing of all the armors and have them ready for the first day of shooting at the end of September, I only had literally 6 weeks to do all the research for all the armors. And when I'm saying all the armors, it's all the armors for all the different ranks for each army, plus the armor of the lord, of each lord, is very different from the Ashigaros or the real samurais, right? So I needed to design all that. I had 5 illustrators around the world in 5 different time zones, working around the clock to make all the drawings, to have those drawings go through the expert to make sure that I was going in the right direction. Then have those drawings approved by the director of the first episode, the showrunners, the studio. And then once everything was approved, we had to, for every single design, we had to do maybe 20 boards with all the different sort of details, explanation of the details of everything that was part of those armors. So we could send all that information to our manufacturing companies so they could have all the details of it. So it was a little bit stressful the first 6 weeks, but the good thing is that I put that in the works, and then it gave me the sort of the time to focus on my other characters afterwards.
Do you have any special memory for the first time you have some of the characters, the actors trying, doing the fitting, the customs, and how they, interacted and how they respond to it?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think that I did a lot of like fittings with fit models about 2 or 3 months before the actors came, right? We got pieces from Japan. We made certain pieces in the studio. And so that really gave me an idea of what the silhouettes were, right? And what worked, what didn't work. So I knew already that I was going in the right direction. But then came the time to sort of start putting all the fabrics together and deciding on, what fabrics for the actor. And so I remember because we had to make so many hundreds of uniforms to create for each army, I needed to decide those fabrics too. And I remember it was maybe around the end of July, maybe 3 months before shooting, that we decided to make one of the uniforms with one of the fabrics that I chose, right? And that was for the Green Army. And the fitting went terribly wrong because I dyed the fabric and to make it a little bit more green than it was.
Mm.
So the fabric kind of became thicker. And so the hakama pants became too voluminous. And so I was like, oh my God, this is not going to go well. So at that moment, I freaked out a little bit. But then I went to my office and I thought that I needed to have faith that everything would come together. It's not because I chose the wrong fabric that everything was going to go wrong. And then all the pieces of the puzzle came together and we started selecting the right fabrics for the uniforms for each army, for each actor. And then everything came together beautifully. We never had a problem. We started doing the fittings with Toranaga, with Mr. Hiroyuki Sanada, and he was very impressed. We barely had alterations on any of the fittings that we did. I had an incredible workshop in Canada with so many cutter feeders and seamstresses that got it right away, and I was really impressed. It just came together very, very naturally. I think maybe the little things that I can say that our Japanese cast really helped us with was, for example, things like the fabric for the obis, right, for the belt. Mr. Sanada-san wanted a fabric that would be a little bit thicker and with more texture. So when you tie it around the waist, you can grab the fabric and you can tie it very, very tight, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as opposed to the silk that I chose, which was more slippery, right? So every actor had their own thing and they came with their knowledge of Japanese clothing, and all of them really made my costumes much better. But we were lucky. I think that for every single costume that you see on screen, I only had time to do one fitting because it would take 2-3 people to dress one person for 45 minutes. And that's all the time I had. So basically, we would dress Sanada-san with his outfit, 45 minutes, 1 hour, and then we would make notes of the little things that would need to change, and then we would move on to another fitting. So it went pretty fast.
I believe every project is an opportunity to learn something new. And I'm sure you learn a lot about Japanese culture and all during the process of the show. But anything else particular did you learn about yourself during the process of making the show?
That's a very good question, Yuri. I think if there is one thing that I embraced about this show was the respect for details. And that's part of the Japanese culture. And I think I learned about the importance of details through my interactions with the Japanese cast and the Japanese consultants. They were all very focused on making the tiny little details matter, right? And I'm more sort of a conceptual designer in the sense that I look at the big perspective of my different groups of people that I need to design. I come up with my color palettes. I come up with my fabrics. I see the big vision. And then, getting to the details is always to me a luxury. And you always think, well, nobody's going to see this. It was really interesting because all the Japanese community was very focused on those details. So it was important for me to embrace that aspect of my costumes and not just focus on the big perspective. And it was really beautiful because I embraced my costumes from 2 different angles, which I think really helped me to design something, much better than I'm used to,
Doing a little bit digging about you, I find out that before you started working on cinema and TV, you were on fashion industry in Paris, and you have the chance to work with some incredible people, Viviana Westwood and the Christian Dior house and all of those little things. Can you go back to those days and kind of revisited some of those moments that you were like, okay, I'm going to be a fashion designer. I'm going to be in this world. And what was it like to you to be in Paris for the first part of your career?
Well, I mean, that was my dream. You're absolutely right. That was my dream. I wanted to be in fashion. There's no doubt about it. Because I remember when I was a kid, I would watch the Gianni Versace fashion shows, and I remember thinking, I was maybe 15 years old, and I was like, I never saw anything as beautiful as this. You remember it was the runway was like a mirror, and then the models were beautiful, and the clothes were so colorful. And I remember thinking, there is nothing more beautiful in this world than that. And I remember I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to understand where that energy came from, what it meant, why it was triggering that in me. So my first, my goal was to really work in fashion. That's the reason why I went to Paris. The idea of being in costume design never crossed my mind. It was, I always say that it found me, that I didn't find it. And a series of circumstances brought me to Los Angeles. I got in the union, and then I started working as an illustrator. But, my main love was in fashion. And I remember when I was, doing my school and going through my studies, and doing the internships at Christian Dior and Vivienne Westwood and all that, I remember thinking that it would take me really long in Paris to get where I wanted to get. I remember thinking that, and I was maybe 21 years old. And the great thing about coming to America, getting in the union, and starting to work in the movie industry is that as an illustrator, it really put me right in the center, in the core of what I wanted to access right away, in terms of everything, in terms of creativity, possibilities. It just gave me exactly what I was looking for. And I think that costumes in a way also have fashion incorporated in them, because you're creating characters, right? So me, when I design costumes, I always ground what I design in fashion. I want my characters to look real. That's what I aim for. So I always try to go away from anything that looks too costumey, too theatrical, and that's where actually my passion for fashion comes into perspective.
What it was like those first days in LA? I mean, after leaving Paris, where you have the chance to really work and learn from some of the best, and now you're starting something new, in a different country. What was like for you to adapt? Was a sense of an excitement, but also fear? Would this work out? As you mentioned earlier, I think your parents were very involved and make sacrifices to make sure that you can go pursue your dreams here in the U.S. So if we go back to those days, what do you treasure the most, or the nightmares?
No. I loved that experience. I love that journey, honestly. And, a lot of students always ask me, to give them advice on how to start. I feel like everybody has their own path, and everybody has to find their own key to get into this business, and to learn how to be an artist, and to create a little space in this industry. But to me, I think I always say that they need to enjoy the journey. It's really the most beautiful thing. So I think about that time with great nostalgia, and great love for those moments of I would say of hope, and of faith that I was on the right path, and maybe a little bit scared too. But I think when you're young, you're just so hopeful. You embrace everything that happens to you. You have no really references. I think when you get older, maybe things get a little bit more complicated. But when you start, your heart is open. You're full of dreams and hopes. And America seemed to me like such a land of opportunities. And I remember I didn't even speak English, but it didn't matter. It was exciting. I always felt that every step led me to something exciting, and so I just needed to follow the stones that were thrown in front of me. And I think that there is a lot of people that start in this industry and get very lucky. It hasn't been my path. I think for me, I've always had to work really hard to get to where I am right now. And when I started, I can say with great pride that I worked really hard to be where I am, in the sense that I had to sleep in an office on the floor of a friend, because I didn't have any place to go. I slept in my car. I slept in many different places because I didn't have much money. I always found a way to make it work so I could move forward. And I never lost, and I was very lucky too that I met the right people at the right time. And that really helped me to start in this journey.
Yes, someone who also came to the US, not speaking English many, many years ago and went through all those hurdles. I can relate and appreciate that journey that you're sharing right now with us for sure. Now, next for you, right? If I'm correct, next is going to be you teaming up again with a friend of yours, director Fede Alvarez for the Aliens Romulus. It's coming up, I think, very soon.
Yeah.
So we went from historical period Japanese to a sci-fi horror in space.
Yes, completely different.
Completely different. I'm sure you were excited for this new challenge, but what was the main thing for you in terms of this new upcoming, which right now, everything I've been hearing about it is a lot of buzz going on. It's going to be like, seems to be phenomenal, very scary. I keep hearing it's going to be like a little bit, the horror back from the Aliens franchise. But for you, what was to be involved in this project? What it feels like?
Well, this was my fourth time with Fede Alvarez. I worked on 3 of his movies where he was the director and one where he was the producer. So we already built a relationship. And so because my parents are from Spain, I speak Spanish fluently. So, and Fede is from Uruguay. So the great thing is that I get to speak Spanish with him. And I always joke because, I always feel that if I speak to him in Spanish, I always get my ideas approved. And if I talk to him in English, it always gets a bit more tricky. So I shouldn't say that because now he's gonna know. But he's an incredible director, an incredibly talented artist, great visionary. And I also feel like in a way, and I told him that he called me the other day to congratulate me for the Emmy nomination. And I told him again that if he wouldn't have hired me again and again on all his projects, I wouldn't have had the confidence to do what I did as a designer on Shogun. I feel like everything is interconnected. And to me, the fact that I knew that there was a director that believed in me and that kept hiring me and that trusted me really gave me the confidence that I had some worthiness as a costume designer. And when I started Shogun, I came from a very empowered place where I knew that I had something to say. I knew I had a vision and I needed to fight for that vision. So in terms of Alien, I was very excited when he asked me to join him on this adventure, as you can imagine, because to have your name attached to such an iconic franchise,
Yes.
I mean, first of all, Shogun is an incredible legacy to have, but to be attached to the Alien franchise is also extraordinary. I was a huge fan of Alien. I still remember what I felt when I saw the first one.
Yeah.
And I remember it was a VHS tape and I would put it on the TV and I had to watch it 10 minutes at a time. It had to be during the day and I had to stop because I was sweating. That's how nervous I was. So, it always had an impact on me. That movie was pure art to me and an incredible achievement for Ridley Scott that I think really paved the way for many horror suspenseful movies afterwards, right? And so it was really great to be attached to this one. And this one is between the first and the second one. It has a bit of both elements in terms of a lot of violence, yes, but also a lot of action. And it's definitely very specific to Fede's vision. So I think that even though it's part of this Alien franchise, Fede was able to incorporate in it his own vision.
As you mentioned, it's such a well-established, it's a legacy franchise. Everybody all over the world has seen it or heard about Alien movies. When you jump and join the process, was that an added level of responsibility, as you mentioned before? You adding that to a legacy of a franchise that's been around for 30 plus years, I'm assuming by now. Yeah. You will carry on. Different challenge, but how did you digest that process?
I think that like for Shogun, I don't like to focus too much on that, in the sense that I didn't watch Alien and Aliens or the other Aliens. I didn't, and for Shogun, I didn't watch the miniseries from the 80s. Comparison is the killer of the creative process. So I'm a very intuitive designer. Yes, you need to do your research, but at the end of the day, you have in front of you a script that is very unique. You work with a director that has its own vision, and those are the things that you need to work on and you need to focus on. And you need to feel the characters, and those characters exist on the paper, and you need to help them come alive through the costumes that you design for them. So I usually never try to look back or look at those references from movies, or even reading the book. I didn't even read the book of Shogun. I just didn't want those comparisons. I feel like mentally it always sort of limits you. It restricts your creative process, and it affects your intuition. So I try to put that to the side and focus really on the project itself, and trying to find to be in alignment with its own voice.
Now, if you were to compare, and correct me if I'm wrong over here, when we talk about being a fashion designer and a customer designer, in the fashion world, perhaps if you are ahead of a brand, you very much do, I don't say whatever you want, but you have a vision, you know what you want to be on the runway, you can pursue that. And your end, you're actually working with the constraints of a script. At the end of the day, I think that's where the bottom line it is. And also you have to work in collaboration with the director who has his own vision as well. How do you find that those constraints enhance your creativity in a way that you'll be able to, find solution to the problems perhaps you wouldn't have to be so challenging if you were perhaps running a fashion line?
Well, I mean, I think that that's part of my job as a costume designer, is that I think that first you need to make a great assessment of a lot of things that you need to take in consideration. And so I always say after that, you need to do a paella with everything. You put all the ingredients together, and then you need to come up with the best solution possible, right? So yes, you need to read the script. You need to understand the characters. You need to do your research on the characters. You need to feel them. You need to fall in love with them. You need to understand their emotional arc, but you also need to understand the vision of the showrunners or the directors. You need to take in consideration the budget that you have,
Yeah.
the time that you have, and the crew that you have too, in the location that in which you're working. So there is a lot of different things that you need to take in consideration before you get to design your costume. But at the same time, it's very healthy, because that's what really creates some kind of very strict, clear boundaries of where you can play. And I find that very healthy. Maybe some people find that limiting, but I find that for me, freeing, in the sense that I start with the ground. I understand what my territory is, where my boundaries are, and that really allows me to then make an assessment of where I am, and then start designing from that place. But I think the first step is definitely to create a very strong foundation. If you don't have that, you can go everywhere, and nowhere. You're just designing in the dark. And so I'm very organized and very coordinated when I design. There is an aspect that is very intuitive and emotional, but there is an aspect that is very technical and sort of almost, very mental, and structured. And you need to mix those two aspects in order to be a good designer, in my opinion.
What is the best compliment you ever got?
Wow, that's a tricky question, Yuri. Well, maybe you can share one with me. Let's see. Yes, I think there was one comment on YouTube that I read. Oh yes, yes. There was a comment on YouTube that I read when that video, that BTS video that FX posted about my work on Shogun as a costume designer. And so there was one person that made this beautiful comment of saying the costumes were so impactful and so beautiful that even if you eliminated the sound on Shogun, you could tell everything about who those characters were. And at the end of the day, that really is the best thing that somebody can tell me as a costume designer.
That is a very nice compliment for sure. It speaks for itself without
Yeah,
no words. That's
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
Carlos, before I let you go, as you know, you watched the podcast before. There's 3 questions I ask everybody who've been here.
Okay.
And one will be a book, something you read recently, perhaps one of your favorites. It's up to you. Something to watch. movie, TV show, documentary. And I guess who should we invite to be on the show next?
Ah, that's very interesting. Okay. So I think the book, I would say, it's a book that I read a long time ago, but it's the one that comes to my mind right now. It's Eat, Pray, and Love, mostly because that's a little bit the journey that I'm going to start right now, possibly before starting another project. And so it has a very specific meaning for me right now in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that. The movie would be the one that I saw the other day, All of Us Strangers. Is that the one with Paul Mescal?
Think so. I think I know which one you're talking about.
It
Yeah.
was beautiful. That was a really beautiful, moving, very, very moving movie. And then the third question was, who
I
you
guess.
should interview next? Wow, you should interview. Who should you interview? Oh, I would love you to have, who, Juliette Binoche.
Oh, yeah, that would be lovely. Well, maybe we can work on that one.
Absolutely.
And the best thing for me, being selfish over here, to do the podcast is that I do have the chance to spend some time with some amazing people, learn from them, have an opportunity to get to know them a little bit more, and asking my questions and diving into their world. And you being so gracious to share this with us. I think I really resonate with the story that you said. It didn't come easy, but you were very eloquently speaking how you prepare yourself. You were always open to opportunities. You always gave yourself 100% to the project. And I think at the end of the day, when people talk about what's the secret to be successful in your career, in life, I think at the end of the day, it is just put yourself, invest 100% of your love and care and your passion in what you love, and let things take care of itself.
Absolutely, I agree. That's the driving force that
Yeah.
should move us as human beings. It's that love and passion that that we need to use in order. So, thank you for having me.
And thank you. And I told you before when we were texting, and I'll say it again because I want to be on a record. I'm not a betting man, but I'm going to bet you're going to take the big prize coming
All
up in September.
right. Thank you, Yuri. Thank you. We'll
And
see.
congratulations again. Have a wonderful time. Enjoy the rest of your time with your parents. And let's make sure to stay in touch.